Here today with Melinda Grimaldi, who, as you probably already know, is the real estate attorney guru when it comes to real estate title. But what we're going to be talking about today is something a bit different, still real estate related in a way, and extremely important, but it's going to be revolving around estate and estate planning, specifically for the purpose of real estate needs, family protection, and any other things that we might be going into. So without further ado, I just want you to introduce yourself a little bit, give the audience a little bit about you, and let's go into it.
Awesome. So hi, everyone. Like Will said, my name is Melinda Grimaldi, and I'm a real estate attorney, but I also practice estate planning. I've had my practice for over, 12 years. I lost track after the 10-year anniversary. And so now, I do a little bit of both types of law and helping clients acquire, grow, and protect their legacy for themselves and for their family. So I'll just get right into it if that's okay with you.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
I want to cover first some common misconceptions that there is in estate planning. Okay, are you ready for the first one?
Yes, please.
You don't need to be super wealthy to have an estate plan.
That was my first question.
People think trust fund, baby. They think I need to have millions and millions of dollars. But the reality is, if you own some property, if you have minor children, if you have some bank accounts, especially if you have real estate, even if it's just one piece of property, you need to think about that estate plan.
What if you don't have real estate? What if you just you own assets? You have a 401k, you have a bit of savings, you have children, right? But legacy-wise, you want to pass something on to them eventually.
So another misconception is that you can just leave all that to your kids. The reality is minor children by law cannot inherit.
Really?
So we need to put certain tools in place to make sure that we don't create a legal mess if something happens to you and they're minor.
That's wild. So by definition, what is a minor? Like what age?
They're incapacitated until they're 18.
Really?
They do not have legal capacity to own or sign or do anything. So that's why you don't put a minor child on title to a property, because if you have to sell or finance or do anything later, they don't have capacity for that.
Wow, look at that. Look at that.
Yes.
And
So
now,
people get stuck.
Yeah, people get stuck. And then on the flip side of that, so we're talking about age restrictions, right? Are there any sort of age restrictions on the elderly side of things?
There's no age restrictions. There's just different needs the older we get.
Absolutely.
Right? So when you're 18 years old, you want to think about having incapacity planning. If something happens to you and you can't take care of yourself, who's going to help you?
Absolutely.
Then as you start to acquire assets, you have that asset planning, estate planning. You start to grow a family. You start to get married, have children. Those things are going to trigger other things.
Yep.
You get older. You get more assets that might trigger different things.
Yep.
Then you start thinking Medicaid planning. I need to plan for my long-term care.
Yes.
And then there's different things we're going to be needing at that point. So it's a spectrum.
Yep. And
really, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It just depends on who you are, what your family looks like, what your assets look like, and your age.
So let's talk about that for a second, because we talk about different life stages and things that I feel are extremely important from a young age all the way up until elderly. And we cover different facets of that. Real estate, we cover assets, things like that. But how often, from an estate planning standpoint, would you suggest somebody reviews their estate plan? So let's say somebody takes initiative, right? They do all the things that are. As a matter of fact, what's in the umbrella of estate planning? You're talking about wills,
Right.
Right. We're talking about trust,
Right.
life insurance.
Yes.
Anything else that
Yes,
potentially?
so estate planning includes disability planning. So like if you become incapacitated, and then it includes planning for death.
Okay.
Okay, so those are the two pieces that we have. So a comprehensive estate plan will take into account both things. If I can't take care of myself, who do I appoint to take care of myself, to take care of me? Or on the alternative, if something happens to me and I pass away, what happens to my family, to my assets, to everything that I leave behind?
Yeah.
So it's two different parts to the equation. We don't always need the incapacity planning because some people don't ever have hopefully you don't have the need for it, right?
Exactly.
But death planning, it is what it is, right?
That's it.
So that's just part of life. And the disability planning, just really quickly, if you don't, even if the spouse, if you don't say, on a legal document that your spouse can help you make financial decisions or your healthcare decisions if you can't make them for you, they actually don't have the right to do it.
Really?
Yes. So this is even applying for benefits. This is selling a home. This is paying bills, accessing funds in a bank account. And then the list goes on, right?
That is something
And then, of
else.
course, accessing medical records, speaking to doctors. There's a little bit more liberal there if it's a spouse, but they still can't make decisions the way that you have it unless it's written out.
So I want to talk about something that I experienced personally.
Okay.
This was so a lot of you may or may not know that I used to work in finance. I used to work in, and I used to do estate planning. We used to work with estate planners directly to carve out particular plans, because what people don't know is that this is custom tailored to you. This is not a one size fits all, like you just said earlier. It is literally custom tailored to you, and as your needs grow or as they diminish, you're going to have to custom tailor your own plan as you continue throughout your life events. And one of the things that I experienced personally, and this broke my heart, related around marriage and then divorce and then death and not having a proper will and children and stepchildren. And to just give you kind of a nutshell of the scenario, because you know where I'm going with this, we had a situation where there was a married couple, assets passed on to the mother, and the mother, obviously, they had children. She remarried, never did anything with any of the estate planning side for the assets from the husband, her late husband. And I remember having to cut a check when she passed, because she got married, never put a will in place, and having to cut a check that went directly to her stepkids, and nothing went to her actual children. Now, probate and things like that, it went through litigation for years and years, but it costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
A lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of frustration, and a lot of emotion.
Yeah.
One of the things I feel is really important when I start thinking about estate planning is I always tie back to that one particular scenario where I had to cut a check to these absolute strangers, and the kids had to be cut out because there was no estate planning, or at least proper estate planning in place. How have you ever seen anything like that, and what can people do to kind of take advantage of that when it comes to
blended families?
Yes, that's it.
That's what we're talking about here, is blended families. And when we have blended families, there's an extra layer or an extra urgency of planning, because the default, if there is no plan, can really mess up what your intentions are, what you would like to see. And it leaves families or children disinherited sometimes. So it's a super important thing to think about if you're in a blended family. Blended family means when there's a couple coming together with children from previous relationships. Because a lot of times, even if it's just done poorly, those sweetheart estate plans where everything goes to my spouse, and then everything goes to my spouse if I die, then what happens to those kids? Because what happens is that plan, if not done properly, ends up disinheriting one of those spouse's kids. So or the default law, if there's no plan, might do that as well, depending on the scenario.
Yeah, it's wild.
So it's crazy. But I want to go back to the question you asked, because we didn't actually answer it. Is how often should it be reviewed? This would have, they didn't have a plan, but if you did have a plan and then later things changed. So we actually do an annual review with all our clients.
Perfect.
Because what happens is life happens, assets change, family change, dynamics change. So we just do that as a best practice to protect our clients and to make sure the plan that was in place still works that way.
That's it.
Okay? But if nothing else, you want to think about those key life-changing moments. Marriage, divorce, births, deaths, whether it's in your immediate family or the people that you designate to help you in those scenarios. Because if you designate someone to help you, if you become incapacitated, but then they don't survive you, then there's a problem there that you have an empty, it's empty in the sense that there's no one left to fill in the blank. So we always build in backups, but even that, because life is what it is, that's the whole point of the estate plan. But even then, sometimes you need to fix because the backups doesn't work.
Absolutely.
Or dynamics change. For example, in our generation, at our age point, we have parents that can still help us. Maybe in 10 years, that's going to look different because they're not well enough, or God forbid, they pass away. So you need to be looking at your plan, not just for what happens to your assets and your children, but who are your key VIP players to help you execute that plan if you're not around?
Absolutely. I think one of the big objections that people have, and you touched on, was the fact that you have to be wealthy in order to do this, right? And obviously you don't. And you know, people will ask, well, how much in assets do I need to? It's not about assets. It's about needs, right? And anticipating needs and anticipating what it might be that you want for your legacy, right? I think a lot of us think of legacy and we think of, oh, I want to leave my property, or I want to leave this heirloom, or I want to leave, but we don't think of what do you want to designate? How do you want those things to be passed, right? How flexible can you get with an estate plan?
Well, depending on what tools you're using and what type of plan you have. The most flexible plan will be the trust-based plan, just to give a comparison. You know, in terms of, let's make it $100,000. Okay, you have a 20-year-old kid that you're going to leave $100,000 to. What do you think is the best strategy for that 20-year-old kid? Do you want to get it all at what would you do at 20 years old with $100,000?
No, it'd be gone by the time of 21. Easy.
Exactly.
Easy.
Very easy for that money to be mismanaged, to be taken advantage of, or to get into trouble. Right? So with a will-based plan or no plan, whether you do one or the other, that money, if it's supposed to go all to your son, will end up being like a slide. All at once.
That's right.
As compared to a trust where you could say, okay, you don't get any money outright until you're 25, 30, whatever the case may be. But in the meantime, it's going to be used for your health, maintenance, support, education, and et cetera, right? You could actually build in even specific things that it can be used for in addition to that.
Absolutely.
So you can get really, really flexible and really catered and really detailed into how it's being done. And that's not something that you could do with the other options.
Absolutely. So I want to take this in a different direction.
Okay.
And more specific to you. So what got you into estate planning?
So in real estate and in law, these things are very much intertwined. Estate planning, real estate, and probate are actually combined even in the Florida bar section, right? So in most of the bar sections. So because there's so much overlap in how one interrelates to the other. So when I first started my practice, I very quickly did all three, because that's just the nature of the business, where you help a client with one and then they have the needs for the other, and kind of circular in that way. But it wasn't a real passion or focus until I had kids of my own.
Right.
And funny enough, or maybe not funny, I probably didn't get my estate plan done till my first son was about 2 years old. And I had a moment of reflection where I was like, wow, I do this for a living. I'm a lawyer. I can do this for myself, and I still don't have a plan done.
Isn't that wild?
And it really blew my mind that was the case. And so from there, it turned into like a mission to educate on that. Because like from mom to mom, like I'm going to teach parents how I planned for my family, and so that they can plan for theirs and take care of their family. So that's kind of the angle.
What's your thoughts, or what do you say to people who say, well, that's just it's another expense that I don't necessarily care to take on, or I need, or I can afford, right?
So at the end of the day, it's all about priorities. What are your priorities? And are you living up to and being honest to yourself about what your priorities are? If you say that your family is your priority, that your kids are your priority, but your actions do not reflect that, then I call bullshit.
I love it.
That's the reality,
that's a
right?
real answer.
And I'm saying that from a place of love. Okay, I call bullshit on myself, right? At that point, and even then, when my second son was born, it took me a while to update my plan, right? Because that's one of the triggers. And it took me a while for that, because life gets busy, and I get it.
Absolutely.
Even if you know what you need, life is busy, especially when you have young kids, especially when you're a business owner, you're working, you have parents you're taking care of, you have kids you're taking care of, you have a spouse that you have to, show love to, and then life just gets really a lot. And it's an easy thing to put to the side, because it's not something that we think is imminent most of the time.
Absolutely. And you said something earlier about, when we were off camera, about car insurance.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want you to just relate that, because I think it was powerful when you put it in that context of cost, benefit, and then priority.
Right.
You mentioned the fact that we all pay car insurance, right? But I don't go out looking for accidents, right? But it's a need. It's a requirement. I have to do it.
It's a requirement, and the reality is it's a form of protection, right?
Right.
And we pay it every month. You can get more than's required. So I suggest that you do that, right? And all those extra types of insurance. Same thing with life insurance. Same thing with a lot of other things we do as just in case.
Yeah, absolutely.
We buy our kids organic food. We send them to private school. We're doing all these things, right, to like make things better or to protect our kids or our families or ourselves, right? Even with health insurance.
Yes.
Health insurance is an even better example than car insurance, because health insurance is technically not required as compared to car insurance.
That is
okay,
true.
because you can't drive a car without car insurance.
That's right.
So with health insurance, we buy health insurance because we know we're going to need, some maintenance, some routine stuff. But then, of course, God forbid, we have some big doctor bills coming up. We have that health insurance to protect us.
That's right.
Well, we don't know if we're going to have health problems, but we certainly know that one day our lives will end.
Yeah. And
that's the circle of life.
It's definitely a circle of life.
And you know what? It's like one of the most uncomfortable. Funny enough, it's super uncomfortable for me to talk about.
I was going to ask
and I'm
about
like
that.
super blunt about it, because I'd rather be blunt about it than like beat around the bush. So that's just me. But in the end, that's a part of life, and the more that we face reality, the more comfortable we end up becoming with it. So it's been a journey for me to talk about it.
It does become an uncomfortable conversation, and it just leads me to a recent experience that I had where I actually had looped you into something where you helped me direct where I can potentially help somebody. And when we were going through the trust for like the designation for the trust, it was related to a parent, elderly parent. The trust was drafted 12, 13 years prior to, and it basically just designated that specific person out of all the siblings, those 3 siblings, to be the person of record to, I guess, run the decisions, right? If they were incapacitated. And I remember asking the client, did you ever think that you would need to be in this position, right? And she goes, absolutely not. But I'm so happy that we had that conversation, because at the time, we're 12 years younger. We didn't think that anything. Mom's strong. She's healthy. She's a bull. Nothing is going to happen like that. And here we are, 12 years later. Fast forward, and she can't take care of her basic needs, right? And I think that ties into the whole priority of things, and then also, attesting to the fact that having those uncomfortable conversations are important, right? It's a necessity in a sense, but it's hard.
It's very hard.
And that's the thing I don't miss at all about when we used to do that, because we used to think about forward-facing things, death, taxes. What if you got divorced? What if your kids, were part of a blended marriage? What if? And that's the thing that people try to escape from. That's not going to happen. It's not going to be me.
Well, the reality is that definitely it's going to be you.
Yeah.
We can't say it's not.
Yep.
It's just how it's going to look like is what we don't know. And so, having that peace of mind that you took care of things. I've seen families on the other side.
Yeah.
Families that have had proper planning. The family members that were left behind had such a sense of relief and would say like, wow, he really took care of my family. He really took care of us. And it's like the last love letter to your family, really, because they took you took care of things. You promised to take care of them, and you really did. And then even like a common example is a lot of parents will get life insurance.
Yes.
Why they get life insurance is for their kids. Do you have life insurance?
I do, yeah.
Okay. So we get life insurance for our kids, right? But then we put the life insurance in the spouse's name if we have a spouse. Otherwise, we might put it in a family member's name for the benefit of our kids, or mistakenly put the kid on there, right? So the reality is, if your kids are minor, they cannot get that life insurance.
So I'm guilty of this.
Okay. So that's problem number 1. They cannot, until they're 18, they cannot get it. Now, even once they're 18, like we talked about, that's a slide thing, right?
Yeah.
It's going to go all at once. Do we want our 18-year-olds to get it all at once?
No.
Definitely not.
Definitely not.
We should put some money aside for college, investing, buy them real estate, put it in the market.
Yeah.
There's so many things that.
And you can make a milestone, right? Like if my kid doesn't go, if they don't go to college, they don't get this X number. Like I've seen it drafted out pretty
if they
flexibly.
want to invest in a business, the trust will give them money to be put into a business. There's different things there, but there's supervision by someone that you appoint that has experience, maybe a few gray hairs, to supervise this serious amount of money. So it's like you're doing it for the kids, but then it's not it's like you're half-assing it.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. It's a half-ass job because you're not going the whole way. It's like starting a college fund, but then not putting the money in it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Then is it really going to what the final purpose was?
And the interesting thing is sometimes it's not pure ignorance. Like in my situation, I'm thinking about my life insurance policy right now. My wife, and I only do this because of the experience that I had with that client. My wife, God bless her soul, I love you to death, but you're getting a very minor portion of that being passed to you. And the bulk of that is being passed to my kids. But now we're sitting here talking about my 11-year-old and my 7-year-old potentially not being able to get those assets, right? And for another, like if I passed away right now, they wouldn't be able to get them for 10
So how it works?
Yeah.
Let me explain how it works. If assets do end up having to go to a minor, whether it's through life insurance or other estate assets, a guardianship proceeding would need to be opened.
That sounds ugly, and it sounds tough.
It's two-pronged, right? Minor children can't take care of themselves physically, so a guardianship needs to be appointed for their physical custody.
Yeah.
And then we need someone to manage their assets because they don't have the capacity to do it.
Absolutely.
So you have to petition the court.
Yeah.
Like everything gets frozen, right? The assets get frozen. Hopefully, it's not a messy scenario for the physical custody because you risk your kids going into, if you're in Florida, DCF custody or whatever children and family department like foster care if it's not organized properly.
Absolutely.
Or you get the wrong person stepping up to the plate that you didn't want.
That's a whole other thing. That's a whole other thing, right?
Okay, but let's talk about the money right now because that's what we've been talking about. Then someone needs to petition the court to say, hey, judge, I'm going to be in charge of the money.
Yeah.
So you have to hire the lawyer, pay the filing fees, and then present a budget and an accounting.
Yeah.
And then every year go back to court and say, this is what we're going to do this year, and this is what's left, and this is what we're going to do this year, and this is what's left, and this is it's a waste of what you're setting aside for your kids.
Exactly, because it's time, it's energy, and it's money. I mean, you got to pay.
And then it's a random judge that knows nothing about your family, nothing about the needs, that's going to spend maybe 5-10 minutes looking at your file and decide, you're the good person to take care of these kids, and you seem pretty decent to manage the money. But at the end of the day, the only thing that's required to be appointed a guardian is to be 18 years old.
That's it.
There's no other framework. And unless there's a real big issue there's going to be no background check. So you want to make sure that for the guardianship, you appoint for the physical custody. These are the best people suited to take care of my kids. And then on a financial side, avoid that altogether by using the trust.
Yeah, that's actually pretty eye-opening. So I have some planning to do on my own. But that's actually really eye-opening.
I didn't mean to call you out on that.
No. But I set myself up for that. I mean, I set myself up for that. But I do this because I feel like there's people that will be watching this saying, wait, I have it set up. I'm thinking this. I have it set up. I have a plan in place. It is a means to a plan, but it's not a plan. When you say it this way, because I'm thinking, who would step up to the plate? Who would be a random guardian? There's so many who's and what's and what ifs. It's scary.
It is scary, especially if the people you would want are not local.
Right.
So, I have my parents here right now, but a lot of my brothers don't live close.
Yeah.
So what if, God forbid, they're the ones that they're the one next in line, right? So if something happens like that, well then what's going to happen is there's going to be a temporary interruption of care by the time they fly down.
Yeah.
So you even want to put in place temporary guardians.
That's right.
For the physical side. So there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. But I want to bring up one more thing, one more misconception.
Yeah, let's go.
That I get a lot.
Let's do it.
Is that if you have a will, you've done enough. Maybe, but the reality is one of the biggest misconceptions is that, at least in Florida, that a will avoids probate. A will does not avoid probate.
No, it doesn't.
all you're telling the judge is who's going to get what and who's going to be your personal representative. But at the end of the day, you're still going through probate. And at the end of the day, if you have minor kids, there's still going to be guardianship. So it doesn't solve most people's goals.
So let's talk about what probate is, because it's a necessary evil. And I say it this way because it can be one of the easiest things and it can be one of the most complex things that a person goes through.
But even in the easiest scenario, so let's talk about what it is,
Yeah.
but even in the easiest scenario, it's a process.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So probate is basically once you die, everything you own becomes owned by your estate.
Yes.
Which is ultimately like a legal fiction entity.
Yes.
That owns everything. Think of it like a company,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
That owns all the deceased person's assets. And then from there, it gets presented to the judge, and then the judge says, okay, let's pay your debts, let's do these things, and now whatever's left gets given to these people based on what goes in the will.
Yep.
Or if there's no will, what the hierarchy is in the state statute of your state.
Yep.
So that is what it is. The thing is, it takes anywhere from 6 to 12 months. That's with no contest, right? Like everyone's on the same page of what's going to happen and everyone agrees. If there's a contest, like you were saying in your example before, that takes years.
So let's talk about that, because this is where it gets ugly. Contesting a probate, a will, or just anything in probate. What does that mean? Does that mean that only certain people can actually step up to the plate and say, hey, I'm contesting this?
So in best case scenario, and usually the more common route is that, everything goes to the children. Let's say you have a husband and wife, they both pass, it ends up going to the kids split everything equally. If they're not fighting about that, okay, then at that point, it's going to be uncontested. We're just processing, but it still requires the court process. It still requires a judge. It still requires an attorney, filing fees, attorney's fees.
Yes.
So the average probate is anywhere from, I would say 6,000 to 12,000.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's for bigger estates, it could be even more costly.
Yeah.
And that's court costs and filing fees and other things. So with that being said, that's an uncontested.
Yeah.
Okay, they're usually flat, they could be hourly, whatever. The point is, it's still expensive, and during that time, your assets are stuck. So if it's real estate, this is where we see, if you're in real estate, this is why probate is sexy.
Fire sale.
Right? This is why investors want probate deals. Why? The families usually can get desperate to sell. The thing is, they don't have the money to pay for the attorney.
Yeah.
They don't have the money to pay for all the problems that have occurred now during this stall process.
Sometimes they don't have the money to pay for the mortgage.
Or the association, the maintenance fees, the property taxes. If a plan is not done properly, that property gets stuck. So ultimately, best case scenario, you have everything in trust, you have a life insurance going to cover everything to get things flowing, and then you're able to either sell it or keep it depending on what the family needs.
Yeah.
But if you're not properly planned, you end up in a situation where whatever you left behind is getting chewed away by attorney's fees, by court costs, by government fees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and then they're left with not much.
So let's tie it back to the point that you made. A will is not going to prevent this. It is not going to prevent this, and that's a really important point, because a lot of people think, whether they do it on legal paper or they write it out, that a will is going to just protect them and it's going to designate everything that they say without being contestable. Because this is the thing, it's a contesting aspect of it that is really troublesome. But even from what you explained, even if it's not contested, it can get ugly.
It still can get ugly of what the results are.
Right.
That makes sense, right? I referred you a client last week.
Yes.
It was a probate situation.
Yes, it was.
In this particular scenario, a grandfather passed away.
Yep.
He had one child. The mother, the son is the one who called us, right? During the last few years, they've been living in the property, making payments on and off. There was probate that was never done, and now they're in the foreclosure process.
Yes.
Now that they want to save the property, it's like right at the end where it might not even be worth financially to save the property,
right?
And it's been chewed up all this time.
Exactly.
They want to keep the family they want to keep the property in the family, but it may or may not be something that works out because timing, because probate hasn't been started, because the foreclosure case is well on its way, and because they haven't been making payments all these years.
No, they haven't. And you just hit, so a couple points on that. Years. This has been going on for years. Second thing is that there's such a huge emotional attachment. I know this because I spoke to the clients and was really trying to get an emphasis of why it was that we were trying to, do what we were trying to do. And it all came down to emotions. This house was their grandfather's house. They have memories of this house. This house is dilapidated. It is not in condition that you can live in.
Right.
But it is emotionally the house that they remember all these good memories in. And I'm sitting there with the client, talking to him, trying to reason, but it all came back to emotion, right? And I think alleviating the emotional aspect of it, or at least trying to put yourself in a position in where you think you're going to be later in life, or what you want for that property, is a huge factor that people just don't, they just discount it so much that when you start talking about trust, it alleviates all that. It alleviates all that. And it must break your heart when you see clients like this, because you know that they could have done something different.
And the reality is, I was like, look, I don't even think you should hire me for probate, because it's so far down the spectrum of what you have left in equity.
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to do with this property? It was
Right.
the only asset. I mean, luckily for this scenario, there's no other siblings that have to be dealt with.
Right, exactly.
Because then that would be a whole other thing,
Right.
right? But, it is what it is. Unfortunately, not all communities are being educated on this, and then it ends up happening that way. So that's why I'm trying to educate as much as I can.
100%, 100%. And let's be very clear. This wasn't a family that had, a tremendous amount of assets. They didn't have a tremendous amount of net worth, but the need for estate planning, the need for having a trust in place was there. And it's by simple context of, if we had a plan in place, we would have known what would have happened with that property. Very
And
simple.
it would have been, with the proper plan,
That's
immediate.
it. Right.
Death would have triggered things to change.
Exactly.
And that is the blessing and the curse, right? Because we have to face the reality of death.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a hard thing to face, especially when
People
you're
don't wanna
younger.
face it.
They don't want to face it. They refuse to face it. And I think we all in our mind feel like, when we are ready, we'll get to that point. And I just seen enough in my career, and I'm sure you've seen it, where people aren't. And when they're actually faced with it, whether it's somebody that they love, somebody that they know, or even their own when they're sick, it becomes very, very difficult, because you either have very few or no options at that point. And then you're left with leaving everything for the people that you care about. Like you said, it's like, don't say that you want to protect them. Do it, right? Don't say that you have your family best interest at hand. Do it. Like, take advantage of what you have now and be able to do that. And I think, people, so let's talk about age for a second, right? Because this all ties into, most people feel like estate planning is for older people, right? But there's so many benefits of doing it when you're younger, right? If you get life insurance is much less expensive when you're younger. And depending on what type of life insurance you have, for what need it would be, right? Life insurance doesn't necessarily need to be for the benefit of passing the assets to your kids. You could set up a trust, right, that would pay off the house if you designate the trust to do that. And it could be tax advantage and things like that. We're not going to talk about tax strategies or anything like that. But
Disclaimer, no tax advice is provided,
it's,
or legal advice is provided.
Right. So just so we're very clear here. But the truth is that when you're younger, it's probably some of the best opportunity and times to talk about these things, even though it might be the most uncomfortable, and you think that you're free-willing and high-spirited. But that's the best time to do it, because it becomes less expensive. You have more time to reflect and think about those things, and then build out your legacy. And I keep coming back to legacy, because I feel like that's ultimately what we always want to do. We always feel proud. Well, what do we buy a home for, right?
Right.
I buy it to live, to have a roof over my head. I can do that. I can rent. No, I have that so I can give my kids something, so that they can give their kids something.
Let's scroll back, right?
Yeah.
There's wealthy families, and they have generations of wealth building.
Exactly.
That have provided opportunities for their families.
Yep.
Or like generation after generation after generation. But most of us are coming in, we're the first generation that we went to college.
Yeah.
We're the first generation. I'm the first generation that went to law school.
Yeah.
Right? I actually also graduated university. So
Yeah.
I'm the first one, right? Not that I didn't have certain advantages from my family that did what they needed to do, but we are setting ourselves up to use that as a stepping stone.
That's it.
To be able, and that for some other communities where people are just getting the first house in their family, for example, you want to make sure that is a stepping stone for the next generation,
Yeah.
the next generation, right? Because That's what the wealthy are doing. So, and I'm talking about the extremely wealthy.
Yeah.
So if you're not in that where you haven't seen a trust in your family, that you're getting the first round, you know, getting a house, all that needs to be put in place for your legacy, because look what it can provide.
That's it.
When you start to layer generation upon generation, you can have started that.
Yep, and you can keep what it is that you worked so hard for, because when you know, at a certain point, there are taxes that get involved. There are situations that come up, like in the situation of you going through probate and you have a mortgage payment that needs to be made. If it's not made, you know, then what happens? Or even if it is made, but the property taxes are not, then it gets ugly and it gets messy. It can get very, very quickly. It can turn that way, and I think that's one of the big pivot points. So back on the will, the you know, in probate, how does someone solve this issue, or at least deafen any potential exposure that they have if they just only have a will and they don't have any other estate planning in place? Well, they don't have any other planning in place, right? How does someone go about working towards having the proper planning?
Well, the first step is being aware.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And then the next step is acting on that awareness.
Yeah.
Right? And really just reaching out to a professional to be able to review what you have and review your goals, because sometimes a will can be enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had a scenario where this couple, their family passed away.
Yeah.
Their children passed away. They have long distance cousins. They didn't really care about probate in that scenario. They were more concerned with, you know, Medicaid planning and having enough money to care for themselves during their lifetime.
Yeah.
But they weren't concerned with what happens to my assets after I die.
Yeah.
Some's going to go to a nonprofit. Some is going to go to some long distance relatives and friends. They can deal with it.
Yeah.
It's kind of how that was. So
for
that scenario, it was fine.
Yeah.
But for others, it's not. So really, you have to say, what are my priorities? What are my goals? And if the attorney's not asking you that and just trying to place you in a standard bucket of a plan, then that's the first big mistake. I don't like to oversell things, right?
Yeah.
Only put in what you need, but you need to know what they need.
That's
that's asking the right questions, making sure you know what you own, and making sure you know what you want and what your priorities are.
That's it. So you're originally from Canada, correct?
Yes.
Okay. It blows my mind that Canadians are technically foreign nationals, right?
Yes.
What piece of advice would you have for, because we have a very high concentration of Canadians specifically in Fort Lauderdale, would you have for foreign, we're just going to blanket the statement and say, what potential risks do you see from a foreign national standpoint that's different than, say, a domestic standpoint?
So it depends on what country you're from.
Yeah.
So Canada in particular have certain tax advantages as a foreign nationals because of certain agreements.
Yeah.
So without giving tax advice, but just generally saying, a foreign national lose most of their money in the inheritance when you're inheriting, right?
Yep.
So whether you're an heir that's foreign, or whether you're a foreign that owns property that needs to be then later gone through probate if there's not proper planning, they need tax strategy too.
Yeah, 100%.
Because it's a big chunk.
It is a huge chunk.
That comes out.
It's a big chunk. And we're not going to get into specifics of it, but it is a very big chunk because this can change on an annual basis, or it can change at any time. And it's important to have an understanding of that, because an asset is, you know, pretty much real estate owned here in the States, abroad, anywhere abroad. I mean, it gets really, really tricky. But the point is that we're in a very unique market where foreign nationals are it's
a big chunk.
It's a big chunk of our, our demographic. So, you know, if you are a foreign national, or you know a foreign national, or there's someone that is in your family that owns property here, I think it's equally, if not more important, to make sure that they have, an understanding of how their U.S. assets would fall in line with, their international assets. So it's a really, really key point on how taxation, because we're talking estate tax is brutal if you don't plan the right way and you don't strategize the right way and you don't have those things in place.
Now, if you're a citizen and you live in Florida, the beauty is there's no Florida estate tax.
Right.
That's what all the old people love to come between the weather and no estate tax. It's a beautiful place to retire. There's that. And then also the threshold for the federal estate tax is very high. Yeah. So at this stage, a lot of people are able to transfer it all as long as you do it properly, right?
Way, yep.
And do it the right way.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful thing to build that and pass that on and give a stepping stone to the next generation.
That's it.
For
So
sure.
from a standpoint of what we've covered so far, is there anything that like objections, key tips or anything like that? Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to touch on a little bit more in terms of proper estate planning?
I think that everyone should get educated first.
Yeah.
Learn about the process, learn about what the options are, and think about what you need. I think that's something that I just want to make sure everyone does. We have weekly webinars on the topic, so it's something that you could just jump on and learn about. If you're a family in this scenario, what would happen? And we actually use a fake family and work them through the different scenarios, so you can visualize what would happen and see what would work for you or not.
That's great.
So education is key. Making sure, depending on your family dynamic, making sure you're not just going to a firm that's going to just plug you in to a specific thing and not really ask you the right questions, or a firm that focuses just on the extremely wealthy or the very elderly, and then you're not really taking into account a family.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Children and like real life.
That's it. And I think
family.
The education and I'm gonna kind of give an asterisk here. Education, in my opinion, is not just going online and going on Google and saying, hey, what are estate planning strategies. Education, in my opinion, and I'm going to give this plug because it's well deserved, is sitting down with a professional like yourself and going through tailored questions in a consultation of what it is that you need, what it is that you want. And I think a lot of people are afraid of that. No different than when someone wants to do a mortgage, pre-approval conversation, and they're thinking, I got to do a mortgage application, I got to run credit, I got to do this. It's this daunting thing and thought of, well, I have to do this. You just need to start with the initiative.
It's the first step. Schedule a call, go on a webinar, take those first steps, and you'll see, if done right by the company that's helping you, it's not going to be that daunting after all.
Absolutely.
Because you get walked through the steps by step.
Definitely. So
to help you make the decisions.
How can people contact you or get in touch with you, or if they have someone who wants to speak to you further, how can they reach out to you?
So we have estate planning discovery calls where we go through and I ask you a bunch of questions and we go through and talk about what your goals are, what your family looks like, what your asset looks like, and then we run through the different options. It's free.
Yep.
And you can call our office, you can look us up on the internet, you can find me on Instagram. Just Google Grimaldi Law Firm and you'll find me in multiple different ways. And you can just schedule an estate planning discovery call. Those links are everywhere. Just the office can schedule you there.
Awesome.
Webinars are held weekly right now, so you can look us up on anywhere, social media or website, and you'll see what those links are for scheduling. They're usually held on Tuesday nights, but we change it up sometimes to give other people flexibility.
Nice. Let's talk about, and I want to make sure we're good on time now, but I want to talk about trusts and buying property, right? Because it's something that we just experienced together with a client right now, and this is very, it's not it's not an unusual situation, right? It's a parent with a son, and let's call it an in-law, right? Mm-hmm. And there's some protections that the people wanted in place. And you were able to draft up a trust that gives the opportunity, the ability for the client to, gives the client the opportunity to be able to close in the trust, right? Specifying certain things.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. How important is that?
So having a trust when it comes to real estate is super important. Like as we were talking about earlier, you avoid probate on the purchase, but you're able to still get a mortgage as long as you, depending on who the borrower is and who the trustee and the owner of the trust is, you're able to still borrow on a purchase. You're able to own multiple pieces of property, and that trust can buy and sell throughout your lifetime. So you could use that to grow with you through the years, and it's not like you have to do a new plan each time.
That's right.
And the beauty of the trust is you could say, well, this property is going to be handled this way, and this property is going to be handled that way. And you have the flexibility to say it can be kept, it must be sold. Some of it should go to this person. They should be able to live in it during their lifetime, and then once they pass away, the remainder either goes to my kids, especially in those blended family
absolutely.
scenarios.
Yep.
That's a super, super important tool to have for that flexibility.
Definitely. And does somebody have to do it when they go to purchase a property, or can they do it after they purchase it?
The most cost-effective option is to have it before you purchase.
Yep.
Because later, if you don't have it that way, obviously anything can happen in the interim after closing.
Yeah.
But also, when you want to transfer it later and deed into trust, we have a lot more steps to do and costs involved because you have to pay doc stamps for that transfer if there's a mortgage.
Yeah, that's an important factor. And
So that's a couple grand right there.
Yeah, it is, and it was very seamless. I think you did it in a couple of days, if that.
If it's for a closing and the client is ready to make those moves and submit information really quickly, we can knock it out. We give those priority because usually we're involved in the closing too, so we know the nature of it.
It makes a lot of it just makes it more seamless that way. I would say in this one, this wasn't complex, but it was fairly, there was a lot of people. You had a lot of hand holding in this one.
Yeah.
How long does it normally take, and from a meeting standpoint, consultating standpoint, and just getting through like the facts and the weeds of like what it is that they actually want?
It usually takes us from initial sign up where I'm formally hired about 30 to 60 days. So it really just depends on how long it takes for the information and then the schedules to get everything done. So how we do it is we do everything virtual until the final signing meeting. Because people are busy.
Yeah.
And so part of me creating how we do estate planning is to give more flexibility to parents and business owners that can't take off 3 appointments to do the old school way.
Yeah.
So we kind of have a new school approach. We have our design meeting that's on Zoom. So we have a virtual intake form that you type in and that have little videos with FAQs based on what the questions are. So even if you put the kids to bed, you still have time to go through and there's questions there. And then of course on the design meeting, we go through any more questions and we design the plan.
That's awesome.
Once the plan is designed, then we draft and then the client will come in to sign.
Yeah.
After signing, if it's a trust-based plan, we built out Trust Funding University, which is a new thing that we just launched, which is super exciting.
Talk about it.
So the most important, Trust Funding University is a course that the clients will go through that guides them through the funding of the trust.
That's cool.
Funding of the trust is making the trust own the asset outright, or in the future as a beneficiary being the trust. If you do not fund your trust, you do not have a complete plan. So it's not really finishing the project, right? It's like, picking the like we talked about, like you create the college savings account, but then not funding it. This is the same thing. If you have an empty trust, it owns nothing, then you're still going to go through probate.
That's right.
So we want to make sure that we avoid that. And we do that by funding it properly. And that's also why we do our annual check-ins, is to make sure, do you own any new assets? So that, because clients tend to forget to fund their trust.
Yeah, it's true.
So we created Trust Funding University to like break it up into steps. Every week we focus on a different asset type. The first week is real estate. The second week is bank accounts, et cetera, et cetera.
So it's designed in a way, I mean, this is like estate planning 2.0, like 21st century, right?
21st century,
And it's designed in a way it's just not overwhelming.
Yes.
That's good.
That's
really
pieces.
good. Yeah, that's great.
Because, some firms will do the funding for the clients. The reality is most people don't want to pay a firm to change beneficiaries on their account, something that they can do by themselves, which I get, but the problem is they don't end up doing it.
Yeah.
So
because they realize it's not as easy as they think it is.
Well, it's just it just doesn't turn into a priority again.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It's like, okay, I'll do it later.
Yep.
Type of thing. So what we do is once you're fully executing your estate plan, that next Monday you get the first homework assignment with a video and explanations and a to-do list.
That's really cool.
And then the next week you get the next one. So you breaking it. It's much easier to attack than just be giving a little packet of instructions and say, here, now you go find your trust.
Right, exactly. Which is very reactive. That's very, very reactive. So I think that's an important factor, is you're kind of hand-holding in a way, but you're doing it in a way that's what I feel is the most convenient way to do it. Mm-hmm. Right? Let's do it virtually. Let's do it in a setting that you're comfortable, right? Because it doesn't always have to be stale. It doesn't have to always feel like it's a certain thing. Mm-hmm. And then not only are you doing that, but then you take the funding university, and I like the analogy of what you use with the college planning. It's like,
it's like opening a checking account or a savings account and saying I'm going to put money in there. I have every intention to do it, but I don't do it. Well, then you didn't do it, and it's as simple as that, right?
Exactly.
Simple as that. Nice. Rounding everything out, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on or go through that we didn't?
No, I think we had a very well-rounded conversation.
Yeah,
So
we
I think
did.
we're pretty good. It's just remember, just be informed.
Yes.
Take control.
That's it.
Especially if you have little kids.
That's it. That's the truth. All right. Well, thank you so much for
Thank
making
you.
the time. I really appreciate it. Take care, guys.
My pleasure. Bye.